This video is made for entertainment purposes only. I need to tell you something that's been eating at me for 32 years. Something that cost good men their sanity, destroyed my career, and proved that some boundaries in nature aren't meant to be crossed. My name is Marcus Webb, and in the fall of 1992, I was the logging foreman for Cascade Timber Corporation in Northern California, about 40 miles east of Crescent City. What happened in those woods changed everything I thought I knew about what we share this planet with. I'd been in the timber industry for 17 years by that point. Started as a choker setter when I was 19, worked my way up through faller, then crew boss, and finally foreman by the time I was 36. I knew the redwood forests of Del Norte County like the back of my calloused hands. Every ridge, every creek, every grove. I could read the land, predict where the biggest trees would be, calculate board feet with a glance. The forest was my office, my church, my entire world. September 14th, 1992. I remember the date because it was my daughter's 10th birthday, and I'd promised her I'd be home early to take her fishing. Funny how you remember the small details of the day your life splits into before and after. The morning fog was thick that day, the kind that hangs in the redwood canopy like wet cotton and doesn't burn off until noon. My crew of 12 men had been working Section 47 Delta for 3 weeks, a 1,000-acre tract that Cascade had purchased from a struggling ranch operation. The timber rights alone were worth millions. Old-growth redwoods, some of them over 800 years old, towering 300 feet into the California sky. We'd started on the eastern edge, working our way west toward a ridgeline that dropped into a valley the locals called Shadow Hollow. The name should have been a warning, but I was too focused on production quotas and safety metrics to pay attention to folklore. That morning, we were supposed to begin clearing a section near the ridge. I'd walked the boundary lines the previous afternoon, marking trees, calculating the fall paths, making sure we had clear escape routes for the fallers. But when I arrived at the site that morning, something was different. My lead faller, a grizzled 48-year-old named Roy Hendricks, was standing at the edge of a grove about 200 yards from where we'd stopped work the day before. He wasn't moving, just staring into the trees with his chainsaw idle at his side. Roy had been cutting timber since before I was born. The man was unshakable. I'd seen him drop a widowmaker in a crosswind without breaking a sweat. But that morning, he looked unsettled. "What's the hold-up, Roy?" I called out as I walked over, my clipboard tucked under my arm, coffee thermos in hand. He didn't answer right away. Just kept staring into that grove. When I reached his side, I saw what had stopped him cold. The trees were marked. Not with spray paint or timber tags. These marks were carved directly into the bark of the redwoods, deep grooves that had been there long enough for the edges to callus over. But it wasn't random scratching from bears or elk rubbing. These were symbols. Deliberate, complex patterns that repeated across multiple trees in a clear perimeter around the grove. I stepped closer, setting down my thermos on a stump. The nearest mark was about 6 feet up the trunk of a massive redwood, easily 15 feet in diameter. The carving was a spiral pattern surrounded by what looked like geometric shapes, triangles, circles, lines radiating outward. It reminded me of Native American petroglyphs I'd seen in books, but more intricate, more purposeful. How'd we miss this in the survey? I muttered, more to myself than Roy. "We didn't miss it, Marcus," Roy said quietly. His voice had an edge I'd never heard before. "It wasn't here yesterday." I looked at him sharply. "What do you mean it wasn't here? These carvings are old. Look at the bark growth." "I'm telling you, I walked through here yesterday afternoon when you sent me to check the western boundary. These marks weren't on these trees." He pointed to another redwood 20 feet away. "That one neither. I'd have noticed." I wanted to argue, but Roy wasn't the type to imagine things or make up stories. I walked the perimeter of the grove, examining each marked tree. There were 11 of them, forming a rough circle about 70 yards in diameter. Inside the circle, the understory was different from the surrounding forest. Cleaner. The ferns and sorrel seemed more vibrant, almost cultivated. The forest floor was covered in a thick carpet of moss that looked undisturbed by foot traffic, human or animal. And the smell. God, the smell was strange. Not bad, just different. A mix of cedar, earth, and something else I couldn't identify. Something organic but foreign. "Roy, get the rest of the crew up here," I said, pulling out my two-way radio. "Tell them to hold position. Don't start any saws." While Roy headed back down the slope, I walked deeper into the grove. The fog was thicker here, swirling between the massive trunks in slow, ghostly movements. The morning light filtered through in pale shafts, illuminating the suspended water droplets like frozen stars. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest tighten. In the center of the grove, I found what I can only describe as a clearing, though that's not quite right because the canopy overhead was still intact. The redwoods formed a perfect circle, their branches interweaving 300 feet up to create a natural dome. In the middle of this space was a depression in the ground, about 10 feet across, lined with what looked like deliberately placed stones. Smooth river rocks, each about the size of a football, arranged in concentric circles. And in the center of those circles was a single stone different from the others. It was darker, almost black, and covered in more of those carved symbols. I knelt down next to it, not quite willing to touch it, and that's when I noticed the prints. Footprints. Enormous footprints pressed into the soft earth around the stone circle. I'm 6'2" and wear a size 12 boot. These prints were easily 18 inches long and 7 inches wide, with 5 distinct toes. They were fresh. I could see where moisture had collected in the deepest impressions. Whatever made them had been here recently. Very recently. My radio crackled. "Marcus, you copy?" It was Tommy Chen, my equipment operator. I stood up, my heart hammering in my chest in a way that had nothing to do with the climb up the ridge. "Yeah, Tommy. Go ahead. Roy says we're holding position. What's going on? Just need to check something out. Give me 20 minutes. Copy that." I clicked off the radio and stood there in that grove, listening. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No bird calls. No squirrels chattering. Just the distant whisper of wind through the high canopy and the occasional drip of condensation falling from the branches. I'd heard stories, of course. Every logger in the Pacific Northwest had. Tales of creatures in the deep woods, things that walked on 2 legs but weren't human. The Yurok and Toloa tribes that were native to this area had stories going back centuries about the forest giants, beings they treated with respect and fear in equal measure. But those were just stories, campfire tales to spook the rookies. Except I was staring at an 18-inch footprint that no human could have made. I took photos with the disposable camera I kept in my vest pocket for documenting site conditions. The corporate office always wanted pictures of everything: terrain, timber quality, weather conditions. This would definitely go in my report, though I had no idea how to explain it. When I walked back to where Roy was waiting with the rest of the crew, I could see the concern on their faces. These were experienced men, tough and practical. They'd worked in remote conditions, faced dangerous situations, dealt with everything from forest fires to equipment failures. But standing at the edge of that marked grove, they looked uncertain. "All right, listen up," I said, projecting the confidence a foreman needs to maintain even when he's feeling anything but confident. "We've got a situation here. This grove is marked with symbols I've never seen before. There's evidence of activity that I need to report to the office before we proceed." "What kind of activity?" asked Jake Morrison, one of my younger fallers. He was 24, eager, always pushing to prove himself. "The kind that suggests this area might have cultural or historical significance," I said carefully. "Could be Native American. Could be something else. Either way, we need to document it properly before we cut." "We're 3 weeks into this tract," said Hank Bellows, the crew's choker setter. "Corporate's not gonna be happy about delays." "Corporate can deal with it," I said firmly. "This grove stays standing until I get clarification. We'll move to Section 48 and start there instead. It's been surveyed and cleared. We can make up time." There was some grumbling, but the crew knew I was right. You don't mess with cultural sites, especially not in California, where the Native American Heritage Commission could shut down an operation for months if you damaged something significant. I radioed back to our base camp and told the site manager, Dennis Crawford, that I needed to speak with the corporate office about a potential survey issue. That's when things started to go wrong. Dennis patched me through to regional operations in Eureka, and I ended up talking to Stuart Vickers, the VP of Western Division. Vickers was a numbers guy, an MBA who'd never spent a day in the field but loved telling those of us who had how to do our jobs. I explained the situation as clearly as I could. Marked trees, unusual carvings, potential cultural significance. His response was immediate and cold. "Webb, are you telling me you've stopped production because of some scratches on a tree?" "These aren't scratches, Mr. Vickers. These are deliberate carvings forming a perimeter around what appears to be a significant site. We need to get someone from the Heritage Commission out here before we proceed." "That'll take weeks. We've got investors breathing down our necks and a contract deadline with the mill in 30 days. Those trees are scheduled to fall. Sir, if we cut this site and it turns out to be protected, the lawsuits alone will cost the company millions." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him typing, probably pulling up production reports. "You said the carvings look old?" "Yes, the bark has grown around them, but then they've been there through previous surveys and assessments. If they were significant, they would have been flagged already. Resume operations." "Mr. Vickers, I really think we should." "Resume operations, Mr. Webb. That's a direct order. Or would you prefer to explain to unemployment why you chose to ignore corporate directives?" The line went dead. I stood there holding the radio, anger and disbelief washing over me in waves. I'd worked for Cascade for over a decade. I'd always followed the rules, prioritized safety, maintained production schedules. And now this desk jockey was threatening my job because I wanted to do the right thing? Roy walked over, reading my expression. "No go." "He wants us to cut it," I said quietly. "You going to?" I looked back at the grove, at those ancient redwoods standing sentinel around whatever lay in their center. I thought about the footprints. I thought about the stories. I thought about the feeling in my gut that screamed we were about to make a terrible mistake. "No," I said. "I'm not." The decision cost me everything within 4 hours. I gathered my crew at the base camp and told them we were standing down on the grove. I explained my reasoning, the cultural significance, the potential legal ramifications, the basic human decency of not destroying something we didn't understand. Most of the men agreed with me. Roy and Hank backed me up immediately. Tommy Chin nodded slowly, said it felt wrong to cut there anyway. Even young Jake Morrison, who was usually all about the work, admitted the place gave him bad vibes. But not everyone was on board. Marcus DeLuca, our skidder operator, was a company man through and through. 42 years old, divorced, living in a trailer park in Crescent City, and holding onto his job like it was the only thing keeping him alive, which it probably was. He'd been passed over for foreman twice, and I knew he resented taking orders from me. "You're making a mistake, Webb," DeLuca said, arms crossed over his barrel chest. "You're throwing away your career over some tree scratches and probably bear prints." "Those weren't bear prints, Marcus, and you know it." "I know what I saw," he shot back. "And what I saw was a foreman refusing a direct order from corporate. That's insubordination. That's termination. Then I'll be terminated for doing what's right." DeLuca sneered. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're just an idiot with a mortgage and a kid who needs braces. Think about that while you're standing in the unemployment line." He stormed off toward the equipment yard, and I absolutely knew, he was going to rat me out. I had maybe an hour before my phone rang, maybe 2 if I was lucky. I was wrong. I had 20 minutes. Stuart Vickers called my personal cell, not the company radio. That told me everything I needed to know about where this conversation was heading. "Webb, I just got a very interesting call from one of your crew members," Vickers said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "He tells me you've not only refused to resume operations, but you've convinced the rest of your crew to join your little rebellion." "It's not a rebellion, sir. It's a safety and legal precaution. If we cut that grove and it turns out, you're fired, Webb." The words hung in the air like smoke. I'd expected them, but hearing them still felt like a punch to the gut. "Effective immediately," Vickers continued. You have 2 hours to clear your personal belongings from the site. Security will escort you out. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address on file, minus any company property that hasn't been returned. Mr. Vickers, please just send someone to look at the site. An independent assessor, someone from the Heritage Commission, anyone. Just look at it before you make a decision you can't take back. The only decision I regret is not firing you sooner. You're done, Webb. And if any of your crew refuses to work under the new foreman, they're done too. New foreman? You're bringing someone in today. Already on his way. Carl Drayden out of the Humboldt operation. He'll be there by 1400 hours with a fresh crew. Men who understand that when corporate gives an order, you follow it. Maybe you should have learned that lesson earlier in your career. The line went dead for the second time that day. I sat down on a stump, my legs suddenly weak. 17 years in the industry, gone. My reputation, destroyed. The mortgage on the house in Arcata, the truck payments, my daughter's birthday fishing trip, all of it collapsed because I'd stood my ground over a grove of trees I couldn't explain. Roy found me 10 minutes later. Marcus, you okay? I'm fired, I said flatly. They're bringing in Carl Drayden. Roy's face darkened. Drayden? That butcher. Carl Drayden had a reputation in the logging community, and none of it was good. He was a production first, safety second, ask questions never kind of foreman who'd been cited multiple times by Cal OSHA for dangerous practices. But he got results. He brought jobs in under budget and ahead of schedule, and companies like Cascade loved him for it. The fact that 3 men had died on his crews over the past decade, one from a widowmaker, one from equipment failure, one from a falling accident that was ruled operator error, didn't seem to matter to corporate. He'll cut that grove, Roy said quietly. I know. Marcus, I've been logging for 30 years. I've cut timber from British Columbia to Oregon. And I'm telling you, something's not right about that place. The way the air feels. The silence. Those marks. He paused, choosing his words carefully. My grandfather was Yurok. He used to tell stories about places in the forest where the old ones lived. Places where you didn't go, didn't hunt, didn't cut. Sacred ground. He said if you violated those places, the forest would take back what you stole. You think that's what this is? Sacred ground. I think we're guests in these woods, Marcus. And some of us have forgotten that. By noon, word had spread through the crew about my firing. Most of the men were angry, talking about walking off in solidarity. But I knew they couldn't afford to. These were working-class guys with families, bills, responsibilities. I told them to stay, to work under Drayden, to keep their heads down and their paychecks coming. But Roy, Hank, and Tommy Chen refused. I'm 53 years old, Roy said. If I can't stand up for what's right now, when can I? Hank nodded. I got enough saved to float me for a few months. I'll find other work. Tommy was younger, just 28, but he was adamant. My dad didn't raise me to look the other way when something's wrong. I'm out. I tried to talk them out of it, but they'd made up their minds. 4 of us, walking away from Cascade Timber Corporation on a matter of principle that I couldn't fully explain even to myself. We were packing our gear when Drayden arrived. He rolled up in a company F-350, towing a trailer full of equipment, with 2 more trucks behind him carrying his crew. Carl Drayden was exactly what I expected. Mid-40s, weathered face, cold eyes, and a presence that radiated barely contained violence. He looked like a man who'd been in bar fights and prison yards, which according to the rumors, he had. Behind him came his crew. 7 men I didn't recognize, plus Marcus DeLuca, who'd apparently signed on with the new regime immediately. They looked rough. Not rough in the way experienced loggers are rough, tempered by hard work and weather. These guys looked rough like they'd done time, like they'd hurt people and didn't lose sleep over it. Drayden walked up to me with a smirk. You must be Webb, the idealist. I'm the guy who tried to save your company from a lawsuit, I replied evenly. My company's doing just fine. Better now that we've got someone willing to actually work running this site. He looked past me at Roy, Hank, and Tommy. These the other bleeding hearts? These are good men who know when something's wrong. Drayden laughed, a harsh bark of sound. Something's wrong, all right. You've got 800-year-old redwoods worth a fortune, and you're worried about some tree graffiti. I read your report. Symbols, footprints, unusual atmosphere. You sound like you've been huffing diesel fumes. Go look at it yourself, I said. Walk into that grove and tell me it doesn't feel different. I don't get paid to feel things, Webb. I get paid to cut timber. He turned to his crew. Get the equipment positioned. We're starting on that marked grove first thing tomorrow morning. I want to see why our friend here was so precious about it. Tomorrow, I said, surprised. You're not going tonight? Even I'm not stupid enough to drop trees in the dark. We'll stage tonight, start at first light. Should have the whole grove down by noon. He looked back at me. You're still here, why? Leaving now, I said. As we loaded our personal gear into Roy's truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were abandoning something important. Something that needed protection. I looked back at the ridge where the grove stood, invisible from this distance but present in my mind like a weight. We should warn them, Tommy said quietly. Warn them about what? I asked. That we have a bad feeling? That there are footprints we can't explain? They won't listen. Drayden's been hired specifically because he doesn't listen. Then what do we do? I didn't have an answer. We drove out of the camp just after 1400 hours. As we passed through the main gate, I saw Drayden's crew unloading chainsaws, setting up floodlights, prepping the machinery. They were laughing, joking, treating this like any other job. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had lost my mind over nothing. But I didn't believe that. And neither did the 3 men in the truck with me. We heard about it the next day. I was at home, trying to explain to my daughter why I'd missed her birthday and lost my job in the same 24 hours, when my phone rang. It was Dennis Crawford, the site manager who'd stayed on under Drayden. Marcus, Jesus Christ, Marcus. His voice was shaking. Dennis? What's wrong? You need to get back here. Something's happened. My blood went cold. What happened? Was there an accident? I can't. He was hyperventilating. Just get here. Please. Bring Roy and the others if you can reach them. I called Roy, Hank, and Tommy. All 3 agreed to meet me at the logging site within an hour. We drove up together in Roy's truck, nobody speaking, all of us dreading what we were going to find. The main gate was open but unattended. We drove through, following the access road up toward Section 47 Delta. As we got closer, I saw company vehicles parked at crazy angles, doors left open, equipment abandoned. No sound of chainsaws. No sound at all. We found the crew at the base of the ridge, about 100 yards from where the grove stood. 8 men sitting or lying on the ground, wrapped in emergency blankets despite the mild September weather. They were silent. Completely silent. Staring at nothing with hollow eyes. Dennis Crawford was sitting on the tailgate of a truck, his head in his hands. When he saw us, he jumped down and rushed over. His face was pale, his hands still shaking. What the hell happened? Roy demanded. They went up to cut the grove at dawn, Dennis said, his words tumbling over each other. Drayden, his whole crew, DeLuca. They took the chainsaws, the skidder, everything they needed. I stayed down here to coordinate the truck traffic for when they started sending logs down. And they were gone for 3 hours. No radio contact, no sound of saws, nothing. I tried calling on the radio. Nothing. So I went up there to check on them. What did you find? Dennis's eyes went distant. The equipment was destroyed, Marcus. The chainsaws were in pieces, like something had torn them apart with its bare hands. The skidder was flipped on its side, and that thing weighs 12,000 pounds. There were marks all over it. Dents like something hit it with massive force. And the men. What about the men? They were sitting in a circle in the middle of the grove, right where you said there was that stone ring. All of them. Just sitting there, not moving, not speaking. Drayden was among them. When I tried to get them to respond, they wouldn't even look at me. I had to physically drag them back down here, one by one. They walked like zombies. They still haven't said a word. I looked over at Drayden's crew. Up close, I could see the pure terror locked behind their eyes. Whatever they'd seen or experienced in that grove had broken something fundamental inside them. "Where's DeLuca?" I asked suddenly, counting the bodies. "You said 8 men went up. I only see 7 here, plus Drayden." Dennis's face went even paler. Marcus went up to start cutting the marked trees. He said something about showing you pussy environmentalists how real men work. He was the first one to fire up his chainsaw. "Where is he now?" "We don't know. He's not with the others. We haven't found him." A chill ran down my spine. "You searched the grove?" "I got as far as the tree line. That's when I called you." "Marcus, I can't go back in there. I can't." Roy, Hank, Tommy, and I exchanged glances. We didn't discuss it. We didn't need to. We'd all made our choice yesterday when we walked away from our jobs. We were going to finish what we'd started. "Get these men medical attention," I told Dennis. "Call the county sheriff. Tell them there's been an incident and we have a missing person." "What are you going to do?" "We're going to find DeLuca." The 4 of us climbed the ridge in silence, each of us carrying the weight of what we were about to face. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows through the redwood canopy. I'd brought a flashlight, a first aid kit, and my camera. Roy carried a heavy-duty radio. Hank had a climbing rope coiled over his shoulder, and Tommy brought bolt cutters in case DeLuca was trapped under equipment. None of us brought weapons. It felt wrong somehow, like bringing a gun into a church. As we approached the grove, the change in atmosphere was immediate and undeniable. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees. The air became thick, heavy, like breathing through wet wool. And the silence. God, the silence was oppressive. No insects, no birds, no wind. Just the sound of our boots on the forest floor and our own labored breathing. The marked trees stood like sentinels at the grove's perimeter, their carved symbols seeming deeper, more pronounced than I remembered. Or maybe that was just my fear painting details that weren't there. The fog had returned, unnatural for this time of day, swirling around the massive trunks in slow, deliberate patterns. "Jesus," Tommy whispered. "It's like the forest is watching us." "Quiet," Roy said softly. "Show respect." We crossed the threshold into the grove, and I felt it immediately, a presence. Not hostile, exactly, but aware. Ancient and patient and utterly beyond human understanding. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, to run, to get as far from this place as possible. But Marcus DeLuca was somewhere in here, and despite everything, he was still one of ours. The destroyed equipment was scattered throughout the grove like a giant's toys. The chainsaws had been systematically dismantled, chains ripped off, guide bars bent at impossible angles, engine housings crushed. It looked like someone with enormous strength had taken each one apart piece by piece with their bare hands. The skidder lay on its side 30 feet from where it should have been, its massive tires shredded, the cab crumpled inward. Deep gouges scored the metal, for parallel lines that could only have been made by something with claws. I measured one with my hand. Each groove was 3 inches deep in quarter-inch steel. "What could do this?" Hank asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something that wanted to send a message," Roy replied. He was examining one of the trees. "Look." Fresh carvings had been added to the marked trees, crude and angry compared to the ancient symbols. These new marks were violent slashes, deep furrows torn through the bark down to the living wood beneath. They formed patterns around the grove, and as I followed them with my eyes, I realized they were creating a new perimeter. A warning. In the center of the grove, right where the stone circle should have been, was something new. A structure. It had been built since yesterday. I was certain of it. Branches from the redwoods, some as thick as my thigh, had been woven together into a dome-like shelter about 12 feet in diameter. The construction was sophisticated, each branch interlocked with others in a pattern that provided both strength and flexibility. Moss and ferns had been laid over the framework, creating a living roof. And from inside that structure came a sound. A low, rhythmic breathing. Not human. Too deep, too slow, like the respiration of something much larger. "DeLuca!" I called out, my voice cracking. "Marcus, are you in there?" No response. Just that steady breathing. Roy grabbed my arm. "Marcus, wait. Think about this. He might be hurt. He might be dying. Or he might be—" Roy trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. I shook off his hand and approached the structure, every nerve in my body firing warning signals. As I got closer, I could smell something, that same organic, unfamiliar scent from yesterday, but stronger now. Musky and earthy, like wet fur and loam and something else. Something primal. "Marcus DeLuca," I called again. "It's Marcus Webb. We're here to help you." The breathing stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. I stood 3 feet from the entrance to the structure, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Behind me, I heard Roy, Hank, and Tommy backing away slowly. Then the structure moved. Not the whole thing. Just sections of it, the branches shifting as something inside rose to its full height. The dome, which I'd thought was maybe 8 feet tall at its peak, suddenly expanded upward. 10 feet. 12 feet. 15 feet. The branches groaned under the strain, and moss rained down as the entire framework reconfigured itself around whatever was standing inside. A hand emerged from the entrance. I use the word hand because I don't have another word for it, but it was like calling a redwood a stick. The hand was easily 2 feet long from wrist to fingertip, covered in coarse, reddish-brown hair. The fingers were thick, powerful, tipped with dark nails that curved slightly like claws. But it was still recognizably a hand. 5 fingers, an opposable thumb, joints that bent like human joints. The hand reached out and gently, surprisingly gently, moved aside the branches that formed the entrance. And then it stepped out. I'd heard descriptions before, read accounts, seen blurry photographs and grainy video footage. None of it prepared me for the reality of standing 10 feet away from a creature that shouldn't exist. It was male, I thought, though I had no real way to be certain. 8 feet tall, maybe more, with shoulders that were impossibly broad and arms that hung down past its knees. Every inch of its body was covered in thick fur, darker on the back and shoulders, lighter on the chest and face. The face. God, the face. It wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either. The features were caught somewhere in between. A flat nose, heavy brow ridge, deep-set eyes that held an intelligence that made my stomach clench. The eyes were amber-colored, like honey held up to sunlight, and they looked at me with an expression I recognized. Grief. Pure, bottomless grief. The creature, I couldn't think of it as an it anymore, not with those eyes, stood there in the entrance of its shelter and looked at me with such profound sadness that I felt tears spring to my own eyes without understanding why. Behind me, Tommy made a strangled sound. Hank was praying in Spanish. Roy stood frozen, his grandfather's stories suddenly, terribly real. The being raised one massive hand, palm out, in what I somehow understood was a gesture of peace. Or maybe a command to stay back. Then it turned slightly and made a low rumbling sound, almost like speech but deeper, resonant in a frequency I felt in my bones rather than heard with my ears. Another figure emerged from the shelter. This one was smaller, maybe 7 feet tall, with lighter-colored fur and features that seemed more delicate, more refined. Female, I realized. And in her arms, wrapped in what looked like woven cedar bark, was a shape that made my blood run cold. An infant. A baby of their kind, no bigger than a human newborn, with tiny hands and a face that would have been cute if the circumstances weren't so horrific. The baby wasn't moving. The female creature carried the small body with a tenderness that transcended species. She held it close to her chest, rocking gently, making soft crooning sounds that were unmistakably the sounds of a mother in mourning. The male moved beside her, placing one massive hand on her shoulder in a gesture of comfort I'd seen 1,000 times in my own species. And suddenly I understood everything. The marked trees weren't territorial warnings or sacred symbols. They were a nursery boundary. The stone circle wasn't a ritual site. It was a birthing place. The grove wasn't a hunting ground or a temple. It was a maternity ward. And Marcus DeLuca had fired up his chainsaw 50 feet from where a mother was giving birth. "Oh God," I whispered. "Oh Jesus Christ, what did we do?" The male creature, I found myself thinking of him as the father, looked at me with those amber eyes, and I saw the question there, clear as day. "Do you understand now? Do you see what your kind has done? Where's DeLuca?" Roy asked quietly behind me. As if in answer, the father turned and gestured toward the back of the shelter. He moved aside more branches, and in the dim light filtering through, I saw Marcus DeLuca. He was alive. Sitting against one of the massive redwood trunks, his knees drawn up to his chest, his arms wrapped around himself. His chainsaw lay in pieces at his feet. His face was streaked with tears and dirt. His eyes were wide and unseeing, and his lips moved silently, forming words no one could hear. But he was physically unharmed. Not a scratch on him. The father had spared him. Despite everything, despite the noise, the threat, the violence of the chainsaw, the tragedy of the child's death, the father had chosen mercy over revenge. I took a step forward, and the father immediately moved to block me, not aggressively, but firmly. The message was clear. "You can see him, but you cannot have him yet." "We don't want to hurt you," I said, knowing how absurd the words sounded. This creature could have torn me apart as easily as it had destroyed the chainsaws. "We're sorry. We're so sorry for what happened here." The father stared at me for a long moment, then looked back at his mate and the small body she carried. He made another low sound, and the mother responded in kind. They were talking. Actually communicating in a language I couldn't understand but recognized as language nonetheless. Finally, the father turned back to me and did something that nearly stopped my heart. He stepped aside. He was giving me permission to enter, to approach DeLuca, to take him away from this place. I moved slowly, keeping my hands visible and my movements non-threatening. As I passed the father, I was struck by the sheer size and power of him. He could have killed me with a single blow. Instead, he watched me with those intelligent, sorrowful eyes as I knelt down next to DeLuca. "Marcus," I said gently. "Marcus, it's Webb. We're here to take you home." DeLuca's eyes focused on me slowly, like he was surfacing from deep water. When recognition finally dawned, he grabbed my jacket with both hands and pulled me close. "I killed it," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "I didn't know." I fired up the saw and I didn't know there was a baby right there, and the noise. Oh God, the noise! The mother was trying to cover it, protect its ears, but the sound was too loud, and it seized up and died. Right there. In front of me. This tiny, perfect little thing, and I killed it with noise. "Marcus, we need to get you out of here." "He could have killed me," DeLuca continued, tears streaming down his face. The father. He picked up my chainsaw with one hand and crushed it like a tin can. Then he looked at me, and I saw it in his eyes, Marcus. I saw him decide. He was going to tear me apart. He had every right to. And then the mother made a sound. This cry. And he stopped. He put me in here and left me alive because she asked him to. She lost her baby because of me, and she asked him to spare my life. The weight of that mercy hung in the air like a physical thing. I helped DeLuca to his feet, supporting him as we moved toward the entrance. Roy and Tommy came forward to help, while Hank stood watch, his eyes never leaving the two creatures. As we reached the opening, the father blocked our path one more time. He looked down at me, and I met his gaze as steadily as I could. Then, very deliberately, he reached out and touched my chest, right over my heart. The contact was brief, gentle despite the strength behind it. His hand was warm through my shirt. Then he pointed at the marked trees, at the grove, at the forest beyond. The message was unmistakable. Remember this place. Remember what happened here. Remember that we were here first, and we showed you mercy when we could have chosen vengeance. I will, I said, my voice breaking. I swear to you, I will. The father stepped aside, and we carried DeLuca out of the grove. Behind us, as we descended the ridge, I heard a sound that will haunt me until the day I die. It was the mother, singing. A mournful, haunting melody that was unmistakably a lullaby, sung over the body of her child in a language that predated human civilization. The sound followed us all the way down the ridge and into the evening that was gathering like a promise of darkness to come. The county sheriff came, but we didn't tell them what really happened. How could we? Instead, we said the crew had experienced some kind of mass hysteria, possibly from contaminated water or stress. The destroyed equipment was attributed to a bear attack, unlikely but more believable than the truth. DeLuca never spoke again. Not one word. He was institutionalized at a facility in Eureka, where he remains to this day, still silent, still staring at something the rest of us can't see. The other 7 members of Drayden's crew recovered somewhat, but none of them ever returned to logging. Carl Drayden himself left the industry entirely. Last I heard he was working at a hardware store in Medford, Oregon. Won't talk about what happened. Won't even drive past a forest. Cascade Timber Corporation quietly abandoned Section 47 Delta. The official reason was geological instability, but everyone in the industry knew something had gone wrong. The grove stands untouched to this day, protected by an informal agreement that no one will acknowledge but everyone respects. As for me, I never logged again either. I became an advocate, working with tribal councils and environmental groups to identify and protect old-growth forests. I never told anyone the full story, not even my daughter, who's 42 now with kids of her own. But I keep the photographs I took that day in a locked box in my study. Sometimes, late at night, I take them out and look at them. At the marked trees. At the footprints. At the destroyed equipment. And I remember the father's hand on my chest. The weight of that touch. The burden of the mercy they showed us. Roy passed away 6 years ago. Before he died, he told me something his grandfather had said. The old ones were here before us, and if we're not careful, they'll be here after we're gone. The question isn't whether they exist. The question is whether we deserve to share the forest with them. I think about that often. About deserving. About the choice between compassion and cruelty, protection and destruction. About a father who had every reason to kill and chose mercy instead. About a mother who lost her child and still asked for our lives to be spared. 32 years later, I still don't know if I made the right decision that day in the grove. I lost my career, my reputation, my financial security. But I gained something too. I gained the knowledge that we're not alone in these ancient forests. That there are beings who existed long before humans arrived, and who continue to exist in the spaces we haven't yet destroyed. And I gained the responsibility of remembering, of bearing witness, of making sure that the sacrifice of that tiny infant, who died from nothing more than the sound of human machinery, meant something. The grove is still there. The markers are still visible. And sometimes, when I drive past that section of forest on my way up Highway 101, I pull over and sit in my truck, looking up at the ridge where it all happened. And I swear, if you're quiet enough, if you listen with more than just your ears, you can still hear her. The mother. Singing her lullaby to a child who will never grow old, in a language older than words, in a grief deeper than time. The forest remembers. The old ones remember. And now you'll remember too. Because some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. Some places aren't ours to take. Some beings deserve our respect, not our chainsaws. And when they show us mercy despite having every reason not to, the least we can do is honor that mercy by telling their story. By making sure the world knows. They were here. They are still here. And they chose to spare us. May we prove worthy of that choice.